can you can go ahead and mute yourselves. And so, yeah, I'm really happy that we're getting to spend some time with Dr. Ware. So Dr. Bilal Ware is a historian of Africa and Islam. He earned his PhD in history in 2004 from the University of Pennsylvania, where he was trained in African history, African American history, and Islamic intellectual history. He's currently an associate professor in the Department of History at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and he's the founder and director of the Initiative for the Study of Race, Religion, and Revolution. His first book, The Walking Quran, Islamic Education, Embodied Knowledge in History in West Africa, explores the history of 1,000 years of Quran schooling in the region. He's the author of multiple articles on Muslim anti-slavery movements in Africa and the Atlantic world. And his most recent book, Jihad of the Pen, explores Sufi thought in West Africa. So join me in welcoming Dr. Bilal Ware.
Thank you. It's an honor, privilege and pleasure to have the chance to spend a little bit of time with you guys. Since the room is intimate, I want to just invite people to jump in, with questions as we go, rather than making this a kind of more formal rhetorical performance. I was raised my father's from Georgia. I was raised in a African-American rhetorical tradition that prizes call and response. so I'm happy to make this more of a dialogue. So I'll say, I do have a kind of narrative arc of where I want us to go in discussing the metaphysics of racism, but I'm happy to take questions and talk things through along the way, rather than just saving that all for the end. So don't hesitate, to jump in with questions along the way. In the way that I guess I'll frame today's discussion is with a series of reflections that are really drawn from the Islamic African scholarly tradition about how you understand the problem of racism, and then my own effort to kind of synthesize those and put those in conversation with my own experience as an African American who converted to Islam 32 years ago when I was 15 years old. This is very much a product of kind of the thought of the scholars whose work I've studied and written about over the course of my academic career, but it's also kind of my own personal reflections and kind of theological interpretations. So you'll get a mixture of both. But I'll start with the kind of analysis that is presented by a great West African scholar called Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba Mbake, who's the founder of the Mouridiyya Sufi order in Senegal. He's born 1855, deceased 1927. And he, in his analysis, subsumes the problem of racism under the broader Quranic sin of kibr or istikbar, pride or arrogance. So for him, it's a subset of a kind of more general problem. And we'll let his analysis open on to the question as we're going to discuss it today. He says in a book, and Bamba, by the way, is a person who writes at least 200 works in the Arabic language that scholars, modern scholars, have been able to catalog. 200 books. Some of those are collections of as many as 200 poems praising the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And some of those poems contain as many as 5,000 lines of praise. So Bamba's an extraordinarily prodigious writer who writes in all of the different fields of the Islamic religious sciences, but sort of ends his career writing mainly praise poetry, because he feels that this is the best use of his pen, is to praise the best of creation after he's already written in all of these other disciplines. So in a work called Masalik ul-Janan, The Pathways of Paradise, which is a lengthy kind of treatise on ethical behavior and spirituality, the discipline that we know as Tasawwuf or Sufism, Bamba writes the following about istikbar or kibr, the overarching umbrella sin under which we find racism. He says, never forget that it was this, kibr, that brought low the cursed Iblis. We seek refuge in God from both of them. Who are the both? He's saying we seek refuge in God both from Satan, the devil, and from pride, okay, and from arrogance. And then he says the cure for arrogance is to contemplate your body and how it was created. He said, you begin your life as a nasty drop of sperm. You live your life as a walking sack of feces, and you end your life as a corpse, odious and rotting. You are all the children of Adam, and it is from dirt that you were created. So Bamba's immediate response to the question of pride, arrogance, pride of origin, is the Quranic response, which is to say that you, child of Adam, are made out of the lowest of all possible substances. You're made from dirt. Um, so from within this standpoint, the question that I often ask audiences of various kinds, whether my undergraduate students or Muslim community audiences, or just what I'm speaking in the Black community more broadly, what kind of sense does it make for beings that are made of dirt to rank themselves hierarchically against other beings that are made from dirt? To spill the sacred blood of human beings, to kill beings made of dirt in order to possess more dirt, in order to have more land, in order to have more property. It's nonsensical. So the first thing that is sort of put into perspective by Bamba's framing of the question and by the Quranic framing of the question is that this is actually not in our innate natural disposition to rank human beings in this way. Okay, the idea is that this is actually a kind of satanic insinuation, and the way that Bamba has framed the question actually takes us into the heart of the creation story that the Quran puts forward, and this is really the crux of the argument about the metaphysics of racism. So let's examine why this scholar, Sheikh Ahmed Bamba, says that it is pride that brings low the cursed Iblis. It is pride that brings about Satan's fall. Because the Quranic version of the story is quite distinct from the Old Testament version of the story in a number of ways. So the first thing to point out about the story is in Surah Sa'd, the 38th chapter of the Quran, in its 75th verse. God says to Iblis, why did you not bow to that which I made with my own two hands? And Iblis responds, I'm better than him. You made me from fire. You made him from clay. So within the chronology, the cosmological chronology of the Quran, Iblis identifies himself as the first racist in Quranic time. He's the first being to claim, on the basis of his bodily composition and his lineage, his origin, superiority over another being. So in that understanding, the devil is the first racist. Which is a really crucial, sort of point to make, because you'll often hear it argued that racism, xenophobia, hierarchical ranking of human beings is something that is intrinsic in human society. And what the Quran is arguing is that this is not at all the case. That the human being that is in its natural fitri, innate disposition, its original disposition, the term fitra refers to the original disposition of the human being. It's related to the divine name of God, al-Fatir, the originator. The original human being in its sound disposition is free from this desire to rank itself in relationship to other human beings. So therefore, that desire is actually part of an insinuation that comes from the devil. It is a kind of satanic attack. But before we get to the kind of full articulation of that argument, let's just dig a little bit deeper into the story. First, there's something that's very profound about the core unity of the human family that comprises the essence of Islamic humanism that is already present in the story. And that is when God says, "Why did you not bow to that which I made with my own two hands?" Because in the Quran, as in the Old Testament, God is usually creating through speech, right? He says, "Let there be light," and there's light in the Old Testament, right at the beginning, the book of Genesis. In the Quran, that formulation appears 4 times in the following form: إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. When he wants to decree a matter, he has only to say unto a thing, "Be," and it is. God creates through speech, through discourse, through this exterior act where he addresses a thing that is separate from him and calls it into being. But that's not how he is marking the creation of the human being. The human being is being made out of the dirt of the earth with God's own hands. Remember, "Why did you not bow to that which I made with my own two hands?" is the formulation. Not "Why did you not bow when I told you to bow?" Not "Why did you not bow to that thing that I spoke into being?" "Why did you not bow to that which I made with my own two hands?" So there's some kind of physical intimacy that is being expressed between the metaphysical essence of the divine and the physical form of the human being itself. In addition to this, the Quran says, this is appearing in the 14th chapter, and then also in another chapter, I'm forgetting the second citation, but twice the depiction of the scene wherein the angels are commanded to bow and Satan, who is not an angel but who's present in the company of angels, refuses to bow. The following words are spoken. The Quran says, "And when I breathe into him my breath, fall down before him prostrate." When I breathe into Adam, my spirit, my ruh, fall down before him prostrate. So just note that already at the outset, with the creation of the human being, there is a special distinguished status that is being conferred upon the original human being. The original human being is not being created through speech, but rather through a caress first and then animated with a kiss. There is a relationship of love, of intimacy, and even the human form itself is described in the Quran. The Quran says that God made humankind in the best of forms. And in hadith narrations, that is actually made to say, in essence, that the human being is made in some way in God's form, in God's image. In other words, that the human physical body reflects in some subtle way a metaphysical, a representation of God's metaphysical essence. It's not that God has a physical body or attributes of a physical body, but rather that God's metaphysical body, which he tells you has two hands, from which he creates Adam, that somehow the human being is a special, unique mirror for this. And there's also another really crucial piece that comes into the story when we're talking about the metaphysics, not just of racism, but of anti-Black racism specifically. Anti-Black racism specifically. And that is that the name Adam in ancient Arabic, as in ancient Hebrew, means dark brown or black in color. In fact, the name Adam itself is the only partial color reference that occurs in the Quran to any human character in the Quran. There are no identifying characteristics that mark human beings with either skin color or hair texture in the Quran, not one. The Quran is literally a colorblind book because the Quran tells you in numerous places that God doesn't see your external forms. He doesn't attend to those. He sees your hearts and he sees your deeds. So from within the metaphysics of Islam, it's actually a proof of the Quran itself, a proof that it is God talking and not people, that it doesn't attend to these details. However, the partial exception to that is the very name Adam, which is a description of the skin color of the first human being that is made out of the dirt of the earth. So it's not just that the devil is assaulting humanity by claiming superiority over the entire species of Adam, which the devil is doing. But the devil's initial articulation of that is when he is standing in front of a black man. So, why did you not bow to that which I made with my own two hands? I'm better than him. You made me from fire, you made him from clay. This is the thing that leads the devil to be cast out of the divine presence. And then he swears that he will spend the rest of his existence demonstrating to God that this creature, which God has shown favor upon, both through the intimacy of that caress, through those expressions of love, and through Adam and the descendants of Adam being made the vice regents, those who will maintain the earth until God takes it back. The Quran says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, God ennobled the children of Adam. And the ennobling of the children of Adam is through that breathing of the divine breath, but also through the special station that human beings have, not as masters of the earth, as that emerges in the kind of 19th and 20th century European imperial vision of Christianity, but rather as caretakers, those that are going to maintain balance in the earth until God takes it back. It never belongs to the human beings in the Quranic version of the story, not to the children of Adam, definitely not to the children of Israel, definitely not to the children of Ismail, not to any particular tribe, not even to all of humanity as a whole. People don't get to possess the earth because the earth is owned by God. Our job, rather, in this understanding is to maintain balance in that created world until God takes it back. And the devil is telling us that a principal means through which he is going to distort that balance is by getting us to see one another with the same contempt that he has for all of us. Never forget that it is pride that brings low the cursed Satan. We seek refuge in God from both of them because their attack is a conjoined attack. The principal method that the devil is going to use is division amongst the people. And it's the reason why in the final sermon that is recorded by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the last injunction that he gives, after saying, I no longer fear that the devil will be able to dissuade you in the major sins, but pay attention to the small ones. He then says there is no superiority for the black over the white, nor for the white over the black. No superiority for the Arab over the non-Arab or the non-Arab over the Arab. The association that's being made is that the devil's ruse will be to divide you. And if you read the Quran carefully, this is always actually the way that the devil operates in different stories. In Surah Yusuf, that tells the story of Joseph and his sojourn in Egypt. When his brothers are going to be plotting against him, there's a warning that the devil is to mankind a manifest enemy, right? The devil insinuates himself into human relationships to divide human beings, because he understands that if the children of Adam actually understand their unity and solidarity, his game is up. He has no cards left to play with. Back to now the ramifications of this understanding. If we understand that the problem of hierarchical ranking of human beings is not part of our innate disposition as human beings, but rather a satanic attack, then we understand that it is actually a metaphysical and a spiritual problem. It is not one that can be resolved through social engineering. And this is an absolutely crucial injunction in this space and in this time. To zoom out now into a kind of a North American context, 2020, as we're in a very particular moment in the struggle against white supremacy, right? Um, we've seen protest movements of all kinds borrow the tactics and strategies of the American Civil Rights Movement, of the Black Power movements from the 50s and 1960s, which were profoundly effective. If you take just the nonviolent resistance arm of that movement, associated most prominently with Dr. Martin Luther King, but also with others, the late John Lewis, for example, those are in fact also a kind of a redeployment of a set of strategies that Gandhi had deployed in India 30 to 40 years prior to that, right? Nonviolent forms of resistance have been a tactical um, toolkit that have been available in all kinds of Western societies and global societies since at least Thoreau, right, who theorizes, about nonviolent resistance. Um, so the thing that I just want to point out is that those forms of nonviolent resistance, protest, making yourselves ungovernable, we have fetishized those actual forms as though the forms have been the thing that produced the outcome. But what is actually in common between the American Civil Rights Movement and its iteration of nonviolent resistance and that which was practiced by Gandhi is that both of them articulated spiritual narratives of transcendent human redemption that allowed for the redemption of the oppressor as well as the oppressed. And this is fundamentally lacking in current mm, instrumental deployments of the technical elements of protest, is that they are actually divorced from any kind of metaphysical critique of racism as a spiritual ailment, which is not just a thing that is inflicted upon the oppressed, but which fundamentally damages the humanity of the oppressor. Am I making sense? That the wounds that come with breaching that fundamental divinely ordained unity of humanity are, if anything, more grievous on the oppressor than they are on the oppressed. The oppressed suffer in this world. The oppressors are punished eternally in the next, because oppression is a category of um, existence that God has forbidden upon himself. And because he is Al-Adl, the just, he always gives justice to anyone who is oppressed. The Prophet Muhammad is reported to have said, "Beware the supplication of the oppressed, because there is no barrier between it and the throne of God." He doesn't say there's no barrier between the prayer of the oppressed Muslim. No. He says there's no barrier between the prayer of the oppressed and the throne of God. Anyone that oppresses anyone, if the oppressed prays against that person, God gives them justice. A piece of context about this to help sort of put it more in the context of my academic research. When I first started going to Senegal in 1996 for field research, um, I was there for the celebration of the Muslim New Year, in essence, the 10th of Muharram, the Ashura celebration or commemoration, not really a celebration, it's a commemoration. And the greeting that is given in Senegal on any major holiday goes like this. You greet your neighbors and you say to them, Happy New Year. And they say to you, be there next year. In other words, they offer a prayer that you'll be there again to greet them the next year. And then you say to them, forgive me any wrongs. And then they say to you, I forgive you, now you forgive me. And then you say, may God forgive us both together. This is the greeting that everyone exchanges with their neighbors. And when I first witnessed this, I was astonished because I had never seen anything quite like it. And I asked about the basis of it. And I was told that God is the forgiving and the merciful. Any offenses that human beings commit against him, He forgives just as soon as they ask. But because he is the just, he gives justice to those who have been offended by their peers amongst the children of Adam. He does not allow injustice to stand. So we ask one another for forgiveness of any wrongs from the previous year so that we can enter the year with a clean slate, in the hopes that if we have managed to pardon one another, then God will pardon us all. And the narration as it was given to me is that in the end, the children of Adam keep one another out of the garden, not God. That it is our injustices against one another and our incapacities for pardoning them, because we will not redress them in this world, that ultimately leads to humanity's eternal suffering. So I'll go back, and since you guys have been quiet throughout the whole initial presentation, I'll slow down. I'll stop and take questions after after this part of it. The kind of humble theory that I'm sketching with respect to the metaphysics of racism from within the Quranic viewpoint of it is basically as follows. Um, it is not an innate part of the human condition. Rather, it is a learned behavior. It is a learned behavior that is learned in its first instance, not from other human beings, but rather from the whispering of spiritual entities. People seek out the devil's religion in shirk, polytheistic practice. People seek out the devil's religion in, cultish practices. The Quran says repeatedly that the devil is to humankind a manifest enemy. You don't have to go looking. His attack is out in the open. The real religion of Satanism is racism. And its greatest historical expression is white supremacy. We have been living for 500 years under the elaboration of a regime which is a fundamental violation of God's sound natural order for the world. And it is not accidental nor incidental that Blackness has been situated at the bottom rung of all of those civilizational hierarchies, all of those racial formulations, because indeed that is a anti-Blackness specifically as a constituent component of Satan's original resistance, his original refusal to obey God's command and simply bow before our shared Black ancestor Adam. Since I'll add one story to this that comes from the West African Sufi tradition, and it's about my one of my two favorite Quranic prophets. The tales of the prophets are the heart of the Quran for me, and the stories of Moses and Jesus are my favorites. So there's a story, it's not a Quranic story, but it's a story that's narrated by Ahmed ibn Hanbal and another number of other Muslim scholars as emerging from Hadith literature about Jesus. And the story goes as follows: because Jesus is a perfect embodiment of compassion and mercy, he wants forgiveness for every created being. He doesn't want anything to suffer the torment of the fire, even the devil. So he arranges for a meeting with Iblis. He arranges for a meeting with the devil. And he says to him, listen, God says in the Quran that his mercy encompasses everything. You are a thing. So surely his mercy can even encompass you. Ask God for forgiveness, repent of your sins, and do what you were commanded to do. Bow before Adam. Go to his grave and bow there. And perhaps you can be forgiven even for what you've done. And Iblis, being stubborn, amongst other things, says, I wouldn't bow to that ball of mud while he was alive. I'm damn sure not going to bow to him now that he's dead. right? That arrogance and jealousy that maintains a kind of sense of haughtiness is something that is intransigent in him. It's not going anywhere. We are stuck with it. Um, and he is going to continue to use this as a device to try to divide us. And the goal is simple: to get the different branches of one common human family. You are all the children of Adam, and it is from dirt that you were created, to see one another with the same contempt that he has for all of us. So if we are to take positive action in the struggle against racism, we have to proceed on the basis of a proper diagnosis. If it is a spiritual illness that is a result of metaphysical attacks, then we need to treat it as a spiritual illness. We need to treat it as something that actually wounds this special metaphysical and physical organ that the Quran identifies as the core of the human being, and that's the heart. These will be the last things that I'll say before I open up to questions. We're now just in the aftermath of apparently Trump being voted out of office. 4 years ago, when we were in the aftermath of him being voted into office, as the white supremacists were rejoicing publicly, you might remember, in all kinds of ways, and just getting all out of pocket in every way that they could. There was a really horrific incident that took place in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was teaching at the University of Michigan at the time. Is that a couple of white boys threatened two Muslim girls about 3 blocks off of campus and made them pull off their hijabs in public and threatened to burn them alive if they didn't. Okay. Traumatic incident. And the Muslim chaplain at the time was a brother of South Asian origin who didn't bother me to give the Friday sermons very often, but he said, "Professor Ware, we really think you should talk, this week to the community, because there were going to be a number of interfaith organizations. The president of the university came to the Muslim Students Association Friday sermon." So I agreed to do this, and I gave a different kind of version of a similar conversation to the one that we're having now. And after pointing out that the non-Black Muslim community was now getting a taste of what all Black people had been getting for 400 years, and that if they wanted to, the sisters could take off the hijabs, but I can't take off my Blackness. After pointing that out, I pointed out that this is indeed how this spiritual illness is spread, okay? Because when someone attacks you, not because of anything that you've done, but simply because of what you are, it pierces your heart in a very particular kind of way. Because there isn't anything that you can do about what you are. And as hearts accumulate those kinds of open wounds, unless those are addressed, unless those are treated, then ultimately that person who has been wounded by that racial assault will come to inflict racial assault upon others. They will either internalize or externalize the metaphysical violence. And in most cases, they'll actually do both. There'll be a kind of internalized self-contempt and self-hatred and a lashing out at the people that are around them. And this is an interminable process unless and until we actually heal the damage that is done to those hearts. On both sides, the oppressed and the oppressor, there is actually no way forward. All of the social engineering to try to address systematic inequities, while it is absolutely necessary, will never be sufficient to stem a spiritual and metaphysical illness. And I'll stop there and make this a dialogue again.
I think Sister Shireen had a comment in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't reading the chat. Forgive me for just blowing right past it.
I just feel so evil right now. I wanted to read this and tell me if I'm too evil.
So, okay. Yeah. So the prophet, peace be upon him. So I'll read it just in case people aren't reading in the chat. You're making sense when I process the idea on an intellectual level, but on the emotional level, I find it very difficult, nearly impossible for me to sympathize, forgive, or even care about a resolution that benefits the oppressor. What you say makes sense when I think of causes that relate to other groups, but when I connect with that issue directly, for causes that I care about, I find it hard to get over the divide between the oppressor and the oppressed. Exactly. And that is exactly, it's part of what's actually taking place in a contemporary American context, right? Is that because we are actually not healed from the damage that has been done to us as others, we're subconsciously reproducing an environment wherein a lot of white people are taking reactionary defensive positions, not because they're actually advocates of white supremacy, but because they think that they're protecting their own identity. And we are not giving them a positive alternative to this. We are simply saying you are bad and therefore you need to be fixed. We're not actually, this is like a really crucial part of it. And it's always the hardest part to deal with. It's the hardest part for me to deal with. But that is a child of Adam from the standpoint of the Quran.
But
The prophet, peace be upon
child of
him.
Adam, and the hellfire was created for a reason.
Of course, and listen. So here's the prophet, peace be upon him, said. He said, "Help your brother, whether oppressed or oppressor."
Yeah.
And they said, "Ya Rasulullah, we know how to help our brother who is oppressed. How do we help our brother who is an oppressor?" And they said, "Stop him from oppressing." So the beginning of that is absolutely the struggle for justice. No one is saying you sit idly by. You have to stop the oppression. But the point is that what we are dealing with are fundamentally structures of dehumanization, things that negate the fundamental humanity of people who are on the opposite side of us in various kinds of political, ethnic, racial divides. The Quran absolutely forbids this, because no matter what a human being may be engaged in, no matter what they're engaged in, a human being is always only a moment's repentance away from God's forgiveness. And we are providing few, if any, avenues for such, because we pretend as though we are concerned with justice as defined by God's religion. But what we are mostly concerned with is the protection and defense of our own identities. So it does not concern us. The souls of our oppressors do not concern us. Whereas the soul of any of the children of Adam should be the concern of any believing person. It doesn't mean that you're supposed to sit there and let yourself be oppressed, nor does it mean that you are required to do anything other than present the truth to them and call them to their better selves. But we're not really even engaged in any fundamental way in doing so. We don't even have a public dialogue around that. And in our current moment in America in 2020, if we are supposed to be, as Muslims now, speaking as a Muslim, if we are supposed to be an exemplary moral community, and we are not allowing for an exemplary morality that is encompassing of white people, then we're not engaged in moral activity. We're simply not. And that's hard, because and it's hard precisely because we have been wounded and we want vengeance. And that just shows that we have not undertaken the hard work of healing from the grief that has been inflicted with each and every one of those racial traumas. I'll say one other thing about this. The story of Moses, peace be upon him, is profoundly instructive on this point. Profoundly instructive on this point. Because Moses has his entire tribe, the male children in his amongst his people. Moses, by the way, is described by the prophet, peace be upon him, as Adam Shadidul Udma in color, or Asmar Shadidul Asmara. Moses was black. Tell that to any of his co-religionists today, they might spit in your face. For precisely the reasons that we've been talking about now, but that's a separate story. Moses had his brother slain looking for him. And because of the unresolved grief and guilt that he had over all of those male children being murdered just to keep him from ever happening, all of those female being sexually exploited because there were no males from the tribe left. When one of his people in Surah Qasas, he perceives as being under attack, he intervenes on behalf of his countrymen, and in a single blow, all of the anger that Moses bore within him comes out, and he kills a man with a single blow that comes from his oppressor's party. What's the first thing that Moses says as soon as this happens in Surah Qasas? He says, he repents and says, this is from the doing of the shaitan. This is from the doing of the shaitan. And even after he's gone through this tarbiyah, this education of being trained and brought along by God, in Surah Kaf, when he goes on the journey with Khidr, with the guide, he still again has to confront the pain that he is in over his childhood trauma. Why is it that Moses is unable to accept his teacher's guidance when his teacher's guidance involves the killing of what he thinks is an innocent youth? Because he is still dealing with the grief of all of the lives that were lost amongst his own brethren, and the life that he himself took, the harm that had been done to his people, and the harm that he had done to another people in revenge for that which had been done to him. He is still dealing with that even after prophethood has been conferred upon him. These are deep, deep wounds, things that need to be treated, not just one time, but that we have to constantly come back to deal with what are, in this case, centuries of inherited abuse and violence. And yet, if we don't do so, we are bound to be the unrepented Moses. We're bound to be the Moses that when we see an injustice, we strike so hard that we kill.
All right, I have two questions. Thank you so much for this really inspiring presentation. I enjoyed it, thoroughly enjoyed it very much. My first question is that this reminded me of this book that I read by Babu, Fighting the Greater Jihad.
Fighting the Greater Jihad by Sheikh Anta Babu of University of Pennsylvania. Absolutely.
And Ahmad Bamba. So I thought that like, I was wondering, I come to your work as a historian, and I have been also thinking about the indigenous forms of enslavement in Africa. One of the persons who comes from this Amadou Bamba area was Samori Toure, the great slave raider. When I was growing up in northern Ghana, we always told stories about Samori Toure. Yeah. And the idea that if we behave stubborn, they will sell us to Samori Toure to sort of like frighten us from doing
Absolutely, that. To get children to behave.
How I was wondering if in your research, you have been able to encounter Bamba's address of Samori Toure.
Well, so as it happens, they were supposedly imprisoned together in exile. Yes, because Samora is taken into custody, if I'm not mistaken, in 1898 and sent into exile in Gabon on the same island that Ahmadou Bamba is sent into exile on in 1895. Mayomba is the name of the island. I believe that they spend some time there. There's later accounts of this that come from Bamba. But I mean, you raise an excellent point. I mean, you know, this talk was really, you know, sort of a religion talk rather than a historian's talk. But I'll just address, you know, so the historian question. There have always been in the Islamic West African tradition scholars that have not accepted the basic legality or morality of slavery as such, and there have always been some, like Samore, who were unconcerned with the basic questions of morality. So the Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba that you just cited is known famously to have said, there's a moment in when a disciple comes to swear his spiritual allegiance and to enter into a Sheikh disciple relation with Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. And in order to consecrate the moment, he offers him the gift of an enslaved person.
Mm.
And Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba says to him, you own this man? And the man says, yes. And now he's yours. And he said, in Wolof, the Wolof goes, Soko mo me yamo mom dachmag mom yoboko borom, which means, if you own him, then you own me, because he and I have the same master.
Mm.
100 years before that time period, there are anti-slavery revolutions that are being led by Muslim scholars who see Islamic law as being fundamentally opposed to any person of faith owning another person of faith. So there's been a long kind of standing debate. Having said that, politicians, state builders, people that were interested in control over people and power and authority, like Samori, weren't concerned with the intricacies of such debates. They were concerned with how they could gain access to firearms and ammunition. And the only way that you could gain access to firearms and ammunition in that period was trading slaves.
I mean, I had a second one.
Please jump in. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you had two questions, but I jumped all in on the
so
one.
Interesting. It's getting me thinking a lot. Because my research was also on Islam, and definitely my second book is going to be on Muslims and Islamic societies in West Africa. And so the other thing is, you invoke Gandhi. You know, like I've been thinking a lot about bridges and pipelines, the ways in which to put conversations of African experience, continental African experience with diasporic
yeah, absolutely.
African experiences. And in the way that you talk about the metaphysics of it is an excellent way of talking about these experiences. But as a historian, I also think a lot about the empirical.
Of course.
And I'm thinking in terms of invoking Gandhi, who is in trouble in Africa because he was
because of South Africa,
racist.
Of
Yes.
course.
Now there is this movement of Gandhi must fall, which I by the way participated in bringing Gandhi down on the University of Ghana campus recently. So I was wondering, sort of like invoking Gandhi in the context of the struggle against enslavement and inequities in the diaspora. How are you able to reconcile the two?
Yeah, I mean, I don't defend, I don't defend Gandhi in that way. To be perfectly honest, I don't actually defend most of the political positioning of King either. I'm a Malcolm guy. Having said that, they're both there for the same reason, not because I necessarily endorse either the approaches or their human frailties. I mean, don't even get started on King and human frailties, right? But rather to understand that, in that case, speaking as a historian, why their movements produce a different kind of social relevance than something that is strictly about redressing grievances of the oppressed. And it's because their articulation of the problem is one that has a kind of transcendent narrative within which all of humanity on opposite sides of fundamental divides can be redeemed. And that is an extraordinarily powerful sociological phenomenon. It's really, in a basic way, I mean, African American history was my secondary training field at Penn. African history, African American history, and Islamic intellectual history, those were my fields. Okay, so these are the things that I was trained in. And my reading always of the thing that ultimately causes the downfall of the kind of social agenda of Black power movements, Panthers and others, isn't about COINTELPRO at all. It's really about the failure to treat the problem of white supremacy and maintain a kind of metaphysics of universality. That is ultimately the thing that turns it into identity politics, and identity politics are always just simply going to be decided on force of number, force of arms, and force of economic impact. That ultimately the struggles that transcend the kind of ordinary calculus of power that have to do with how many people you have and what kinds of resources they have access to, whether economically, militarily, or otherwise, is that they're able to appeal to some kind of transcendent scale of meaning that gets a response outside of the identity group, outside of the divides that are currently ripping apart the society. And for that, now not thinking in terms of like as a scholar of religion, but strictly as a historian, it's access to that range of transcendent meaning that actually produces the transformative sociological moment. Always. The story of the foundation of Islam itself is such a story, right? It's ultimately the ability to create a framework that that allows for the redemption of the polytheists, that allows for a redemption of those. I mean, the Umayyads are the descendants of the people that tried to assassinate Muhammad. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that, you know, when he returns to Mecca, no blood is spilled in a city where his friends had been murdered. That there's this effort to try to kind of have access to a kind of universal humanism that is actually at the foundation of the Abrahamic faiths. That is something that and the reference to Gandhi is really there primarily just to say that it's not unique just to the Abrahamic tradition, that this is a thing that is possible within the kind of metaphysical framing of multiple global traditions. Like we have this in us as human beings, to frame our understanding of the relationship between the unseen world and the seen world in a way that allows us to struggle against injustice, but also acknowledge our shared humanity. And that when we do it, which is hard, that it actually works.
Can I ask a question? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Jazakumullah khair. I really appreciate the educational, lecture that you have shared with us. In particular, when you talked about the healing process that is needed to, deal with the systemic oppression that exists, for example, in the context of systemic racism, from the oppressed side, from the oppressor side? Are there some insight that you can elaborate for us, like in terms of how to begin the healing process, especially from the oppressed people side or from the oppressor side, like something that you see missing in our contemporary context, because you have elaborated that we are all human beings, but we have this systemic, racism existed for 400 years, and still we are grappling with it. Especially the oppressed people. What insight can you give us from the context of Amadou Bamba, or from the context?
You put your finger on it. That was where I was going to go, was actually straight to Bamba, for the following reason. I mean, so one of the things that's known, Brother Wasim mentioned the great book by Sheikh Anta Babu, Fighting the Greater Jihad, is that in the region where Bamba's movement begins, which is in kind of the central portion of Senegal, was really the heartland of domestic slavery within the 19th century. So there's a lot of formerly enslaved people that have been systematically denied access to Islamic education, systematically, denied access to kind of public dignity, right? That they're looked upon with scorn. And that same sensibility that has Bamba saying, if you own him, then you own me because we have the same master, is really at the heart of how he pursues the project of reconstituting the society in a different way. So a number of just very simple things. He immediately pursues a policy of social inversion. When people that come from noble backgrounds submit themselves to him as a spiritual leader, he immediately assigns tasks to them that used to be associated with their slaves. They fetch water for the rest of the community. And anytime a formerly enslaved person shows an ability for Quran memorization and personal piety, he has that person lead the prayers. In order to demonstrate in practical, visible terms that what defines status in this community is one striving to be near to God, not who your daddy was or what he did for a living. Okay, so the immediate, actual practical inversion of social roles is like a crucial part of it. But the more fundamental part has to do with the science of Sufism that Brother Shane mentioned, is the subject of the edited volume, Jihad of the Pen. Because this is the science of usually it's framed in the following terms: it's the science of akhlaq and haqa'iq, the science of ethical traits and spiritual realities, okay? This is the discipline that is used to correct and aid human hearts. The Sufi guides are often described as heart doctors, literally, right? That what they're engaged in is actually healing human hearts. So that is the kind of other, sort of piece of it. It's not just that you need a metaphysical diagnosis of the nature of the problem, but that the actual goal is to use the spiritual resources of the tradition to try to fix broken hearts. And that is something that requires direct teaching and moving through initiatory steps that are about purification of the ego, dealing with pain and trauma in the past, overcoming grief, overcoming fear, about instilling certain kinds of self-discipline and postures of humility so that individual emotional states don't cause people to carry themselves away. And when I'm talking about West African models for social justice work in other environments, I often point out that there have been a multitude of different specific models of how you are going to reorganize a social structure. But in no West African example that I'm familiar with are the models of structure the most important thing. Always the most important thing is the nature of the kinds of human beings that you're going to populate the structures with. And the way that I'll say it is that you can sketch a beautiful design for an edifice, but if all of the individual bricks are rotten, it doesn't matter what the blueprint that you drew looks like. And that the approach that you find over and over again in a West African Sufi context is that the goal is to just heal one human being at a time and then place them shoulder to shoulder with one another as they start to build a sound society. And it's much less important that you focus on having something like an Islamic state or Sharia law than it is to make sound human beings. And because if you just make sound human beings, then any of the structures that they bring into being are sound. And if you don't make sound human beings, you can have the best structures, but you'll have a corrupt edifice. It has to start with the personal, spiritual and ethical striving. And that's hard work. It's way harder work than electoral politics, right? Yeah.
I want to respect everyone's time. We'd planned on going about an hour, but are there any other questions, comments, concerns? Well, I really appreciate you being with us. You don't often hear this. It did me a lot of good to hear you say this, because I know, just in my heart, I know when we have to stand up, speak out for justice, we also have to go look at ourselves in the mirror, be vigilant, monitor ourselves, our reactions to other humans, and see, does it line up with what we profess to hold sacred, and try to heal ourselves. And as you said, I really believe, it's in the Hikam of Ibn Attillah, paraphrasing, like, if you don't think God can take anyone and make that person a saint in a second, you're underestimating the power of God. So we need to be hopeful, not let people off the hook, but some people change, some people's hearts turn. God is all powerful. So we have to be hopeful, and I appreciate you sharing that with us.
No, that is so real. And I mean, I've told the story in other contexts. The book that brought me to Islam was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And it was precisely because it demonstrated that it does not matter how dark the places that you are in may happen to be. There's no place that God cannot find you and pull you out. No place. And unless I'll go farther than Ibn Attallah on that, is that if you don't believe that God can find anybody engaged in any sin and turn them into a saint, then you're guilty of disbelief. Because you're assigning limits to divine mercy. And that is the definition of kufr.
Well, we appreciate you spending some time with us.
My pleasure, man. Anytime.
Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
All right, God bless. Walaikum salam.